How is everybody this morning? It doesn't sound like, oh, there it is. Now I got sound. That's good. I want to see if I can grab everybody's attention this morning. Does everybody have a list of questions for next week? Did you get some back there? Okay. Hey, you guys don't have to run off. This is a good class.
Oh, all right, thank you.
We actually put this class out on Facebook and on YouTube for people like Debbie Duke and all that are at home. One of the things that happens in this class, especially when we have a lot of discussion, if Johnny's up here and he's asked a question or something and you go to answer it, on the internet it just goes quiet because this mic has a hard time picking you up. But if you look right up here over your head, there's a little wire hanging down from that beam. That's a condenser mic, and it will pick you up if you speak up. So, well, no, just try and speak loud enough that something would pick you up, because we want our people at home to be more involved in the class, and then, just one side of a conversation is not that good. Pull out your questions for this week. We're in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. I want to go over these questions. And going over these questions tells me who has read their lesson for this week and who didn't. And I know last week that Johnny said that there would be a test. It's not really a test, so we're just going to go over these questions. So the first one says, what does Paul say he will go on doing? What's Paul going to go on doing? Boasting. Very good. Who will Paul not boast about? About himself. What one thing will Paul boast about in himself? One thing.
His infirmities.
Weaknesses, infirmities, his weaknesses, yes. If Paul decided to boast about himself, why would he not be a fool? If he decided to go ahead and boast about himself, why does he say he wouldn't be a fool?
Speaking truthfully.
He would be speaking truthfully. He'd be saying the truth. Why does Paul refrain from boasting about himself? He doesn't want people to think more of him than he really is. He wants them to evaluate him based on what he says and what he does. Very good. What does Paul have that might cause him to be conceited? Well, the thorn's going to stop him from being conceited, but why might he be conceited?
He has strong apostolic credentials.
Well, yeah, but there's specific words there in the text. He had some surpassing revelations, and the thorn was given to him so that he would not be conceited with those. What was given to Paul to torment him? A thorn. Okay? How many times did Paul plead with the Lord for the thorn to be removed? 3 times. What was the Lord's answer to his pleas? He said, my grace is sufficient. You can deal with this. Yeah, my grace is sufficient. My power is made perfect in weakness. What will Paul boast about gladly? His infirmities. You're there too. What 5 things does Paul list that he delights in? His infirmities, insults, hardships, persecutions, difficulties, right. When is Paul strong? When he's weak. Who does Paul say he is not inferior to? What he terms as super apostles. What wrong does Paul ask the church to forgive him for? Never being a burden to them. What does Paul want instead of their possessions? Their hearts, them. Right. What should parents save up for? Their children. What is Paul willing to spend everything he has for? For them, for their souls, for their hearts. What does Paul say he never was to the church? A burden. Paul says everything they do is for what? For their strengthening of the church, yes. What is Paul afraid of when he comes to them?
That they might be living ungodly lives.
They might still be living ungodly lives. They won't be as he wants them to be when he gets there. Very good. Sounds like everybody, huh? Well, it reaffirms to me that a lot of you did answer these questions and do your homework. You know, they say when we get old, we revert back to our childhood. Well, we're not completely old yet, but we are. So we're like reverting back to elementary school and middle school rather than all the way back and having homework. Johnny's got some questions for next week, but I tell you, I'm teaching this class the next quarter, and we will be studying Philippians and Colossians and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And we will have questions to go over every week. I appreciate you reading ahead and doing your lesson. How many of you have ever been honored in any way? Ron, Bill, you want to share that with us?
Well, I was given an engineering honor.
Oh, great.
Engineering Society.
Yeah. Ron? Railroad?
Yeah, but when I went in the service, went in basic training, and I was in basic training, there were 2 guys from the south, and all the rest were from the north. And I was the fastest guy in the whole company.
Running?
So I got to carry the guide on.
Ah, okay.
People, if you're not in the service, you wouldn't know what that was.
Yeah.
The guide, you got to carry the guide.
Guide on.
What's the guide on?
It's a flag.
Flag.
Yeah. You know, I look back at my life, at things that may have been an honor. And, you know, the thing that I think has been the biggest honor is when somebody came up to me and told me something that my kids did that was good. You know, I remember one day when I was growing up, kids didn't get trophies all the time for being on a team. You got trophies for achieving something. And I had a bunch of trophies from baseball, and I remember going in, when I went to college, going in and just cleaning them all out and throwing them away. And my mother said, "You're going to throw those away?" I said, "Yeah, they mean absolutely nothing." You know, as far as people I meet in the rest of my life, they're not going to care about what I did in high school, you know. I think Paul received a great honor when the Lord came down and spoke to him. And if you remember back from Acts chapter 9, you know, Paul lost his sight for like 3 days. And in the beginning of chapter 12, Paul says that he's going to go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. And he says, "I knew a guy that 14 years ago was taken up into the third heaven, into paradise, and was told things that were just things that men should not be able to express, or not allowed to express and all. He says, I'm going to boast about somebody like that, but I'm not going to boast about myself. Well, I think it was has to be considered to be a great honor that Paul was singled out as the one man that the Lord chose to be added to his apostles to take this, the gospel to the Gentiles.
Especially where he was in that.
Oh, yeah.
In the government.
It was a 180-degree turn for Paul. Most people would be inclined to boast about such an honor. And I don't know, how do you feel about people that you run into that boast all the time? Huh? Yeah, windbags, you know. But, you know, I know people that their whole conversation is I. I did this, I do this, I can do this, I do this. We have a term for that, and we call that being conceited, being arrogant, you know. And we usually don't like to be around people that are doing that. Paul's statement that he's not going to boast about himself, and Dale answered that question, I think, because he doesn't want people to think more of him than they ought to. He wants them to think about him for what he says and what he does, for his actions, rather than what he himself boasts and says that he can do. And even though he had the right to go on and to boast about a lot of things, he says that he was given a thorn in the flesh to stop him from being conceited. Any of us have a thorn in the flesh? And before you answer that question, how bad does that thorn in the flesh have to be before you consider it to be a messenger from Satan? A lot of things that we say, oh, this is a thorn in the flesh, it's an aggravation to me. I wish it wasn't there, you know. Sometimes we think certain people are a thorn in the flesh, you know. If I didn't have to deal with him, my life would be great. But the thorn in the flesh that Paul is talking about here is something that was significant enough that he would not feel conceited, that he would not be arrogant about the great honor given or blessed with to know many of the mysteries that men couldn't utter. And it was bad enough that he said it was a messenger from Satan to stop him from being there. So what do we think flesh was? You know, if you think you have the answer, you're just taking a guess. Because there's nothing in the scriptures that tell us what the answer is. I did some research, if you can call it that. I read a lot of stuff that people said and things. And I'll give you a list here of what some people have said that it could be. His eyesight. You know? Well, I find the eyesight being kind of strange. You know, if he was blind and God made it where he could see again, I don't think he would give him halfway vision. I think he'd give him great vision when he took the scales off. But that's just me. Malaria, migraine headaches, epilepsy, impotence, a speech issue, which is one that a lot of people are saying. Some people said that it could have been a certain person or a group of people. You know, maybe the fact that the Jews would not, you know, his people would not openly accept Christ.
I was going to tell you, Bob, I've read John to buffet was used so many times in the New Testament to mean a person buffeting you, that it was not a physical thing.
Not a physical thing.
And he said nowhere in Scripture is that word, the Greek word for buffet, used. And he was saying that perhaps it was the ringleader of the false prophets that came in and, and it kept on. They followed him from church to church, and especially in Corinth, because I think he must have felt like they would take the whole country down with them. So that made more sense than anything I could come up with after I read it. I thought, yes, if that word is truly has a meaning of somebody else.
And we know how certain people can be a pain to us forever. And I have a friend that used to be an elder that won't be an elder again because somebody in his congregation made his life just miserable in the church, and that's a shame. But I can't endorse any of these as being, what Paul's actual thorn in the flesh was. Some people say it was a temptation. Some people say it was sin or a particular sin. And I think there's some background for the speech, maybe, because Paul does make reference, made it in chapter 11, I think, that saying that he was never trained as an eloquent speaker. But I think there's a lot of evidence that you could pull to the fact that it may be sin. Romans 7. Turn over to Romans chapter 7, if you would. We'll start in verse 14, and I want to read that. Now maybe I need to start in 7. No, start in 14. I have this paragraph from 14 to the end of the chapter in my Bible, and I'll see if I hold it up here so you can see. There's like 3 different colors here: blue and yellow and pink in there, and it's underlined. And I've had this Bible a long time, so it is. I'm sure it's gone through several renovations in there, and there's stars out in the margins and arrows pointing at different verses and stuff. And I have read this section a lot. And I want us to read this and go over what Paul's saying here. And you tell me if you think Paul is really wrestling with something or if he's just saying it. And there are different opinions about this. Because some people feel Paul is just using this as a teaching illustration here. I really believe Paul is wrestling with it, personally. Starting in verse 14, we know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is a sin living in me. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. When I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in my members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within my members. What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in the sinful nature a slave to the law of sin. What does Paul sound like there?
Sounds like me.
Sound like everybody else.
Sounds like everybody else? A question. Does he sound arrogant?
No,
No. Does he sound conceited?
no.
No. I'm going to use a term here. Does he sound self-righteous? No. We often label some people that we come in contact with as being a self-righteous individual. Somebody that has all the answers. Somebody that always does everything right, never does everything wrong in their own mind or opinion.
I think this is just self-confession. I mean, I think he's just laying his soul bare. It's just, he's sold out to sin, he knows. But he also knows that Christ has saved him from all that.
Yeah. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, where he talks about God's answer, what does he say God's answer is? My grace is sufficient. My power is made known through weakness. And here at the end of this, what does he say there? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ that rescues him. I don't know if this is what Paul was talking about when he was talking about a thorn in the flesh. There are lots of things in the scriptures that I point to all the time as something that sobers up my life. I look back, I got a long life in the church, 66 years now. And there was a time in my life that I thought preachers were, could do no wrong. Seriously. And then as I got older and everything, I started running around with preachers.
You found out how human they are.
And you find out just how human they are. Everything we hear from preachers is good stuff. It's telling us, trying to convict us in our hearts as to how we should be. And usually the person that's doing that, you just automatically assume has their act all together. But it's not true. They're human just like we are. The same thing goes for the elders that I run with. I'm blessed to serve with some men that I hold in deep respect. I've got friends that I grew up with, went to college with, played ball with, and everything that are serving as elders at Woodson Chapel and Creve Hall and Barry's Chapel and Hillsborough, other churches around town. And as great as these guys are, they still have issues. The reason this is highlighted in 3 different colors and is written up and everything is because I've read this so many times in my life. And I can't tell you where it was in my life that all of a sudden, let me digress a step or two. There used to be a time in my life when somebody that I might have an opportunity to talk to, I would kind of turn away from because I knew they were a slime bag. Really. Whether it's any number of things that I could see that was obviously wrong in their life that they weren't repenting of, I just go find somebody else. When I started realizing there's 1 or 2 things in my life that aren't straight, that aren't right. And no matter how much I pray about it, no matter how much I try and work on it, they may go away for 3 months and then boom, they're right back there again. And one of them is the tongue. I played ball in a large high school all my life, and I was in the military and everything, and there are some bad habits that you get into. Work as hard as you want to work. Those are bad habits that are hard to break. And you can put effort towards it and work on it and do everything you can and clean up your act, and 6 months later, there it is again. How do you win? How do you go on and take a self-righteous attitude or a conceited attitude about your Christianity when you know that there's something wrong in your life? Whether it be your tongue, whether it be gossip, whether it be anything that we just haven't beat yet, when we know that is there. And how many times do you pray to the Lord and ask Him to take that sin away? How many times? I can think of times, and I know I've said this before, I can think of times that I have prayed and said, Lord, if you'll just forgive me for this one more time, I will never do it again. Do you realize how stupid that statement is? Paul, the Apostle Paul, the man that had been taken up into the third heaven, the man that was given all these great revelations and everything, still wrestled with sin, and the things he didn't want to do is what he found himself doing. Why would I think that I could be any better at it than Paul?
I think it'll haunt us till we die.
Well,
we're more than conquerors through Christ, and we can keep trying to get over these things. Anger, I have a problem with anger. I tried.
No.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But sometimes you're surrounded. You really almost have to stay in a room by yourself, with no mechanical devices or anything, and stay in prayer. Well, He tells us, never cease from praying. So you've got to be praying in your heart and in your mind all the time. You're not talking about praying when we're driving.
Yeah. And I hate to say that it will be with us forever.
I think it will. As long as we're in the flesh, I think it will be.
Some things may be. There are problems. I'm getting away from the lesson now, but there are problems that are in my life that I prayed about and prayed about and prayed about and prayed about. And today they're gone. I don't know when that particular bad habit or that particular thing disappeared, but eventually, it was gone. It's gone. It's not there today. Maybe it's because I grew older and certain things aren't the, desires have gone elsewhere, wants and things have gone. I don't know. But the thing that plagued me that I prayed about all the time now is non-existent. So I got to give credit. The Lord took that away.
Well, I think as we get older, things that we worried about, prayed about, do go away. Because we just change. And we have different emphasis, and all that trying helped.
So when the Lord told Paul that his grace was sufficient, what does that mean? Mary?
Well, I think you got better at those things because you're moving chairs. If we want to go back to the song.
Yeah.
Because, and I don't think anybody, I'd say Paul was pretty much a fifth chair guy.
Should have been fifth chair, and probably much
But
was.
still, this passage shows us that he's in chair 4.
Exactly.
I did not understand why he couldn't move up and stay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, now what was we're human and we have sin and it's going to be that way. There's nothing we can do about it.
greater than all of our sin, as the song goes.
Yeah.
It's gotta be that way.
And Paul writes a ton about grace in Romans.
It's gotta be for Paul. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, I believe he was the greatest Christian who ever lived. And I think he was on fire for the Lord. And so he belongs in that little church.
Well, we put him in the fifth chair. He's on fire for the Lord, but he's still
Well,
fallible.
being on fire for the Lord doesn't mean that you aren't still,
Well, you got to remember though, that I don't care how good a Christian you are, you're not perfect.
Thank you.
It's a constant thing until the day we die.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, Bill has tried to straighten me out. But he still can't do it.
Well,
That's Sandra's job.
and I fail miserably.
over the past several years, I think his efforts are working to some extent because
The Lord let you live so long.
But you know, when I think about, in Paul, when he talks about grace, he says, should we go on sinning so that grace may abound? By no means. But God's grace is sufficient to cover all of our sins, to cover all of our weaknesses. And Paul realizes, and I'm not saying that Paul thought that sin was his thorn in the flesh. I just think I can make a pretty good argument for that. But other people think they can make a good argument for other things, and we really don't know. But Paul knew when he wrote this that there was the capacity for him to become conceited and uppity in his handling of the church if this messenger from Satan, this thorn in the flesh that he wrestled with, was not sent there to humble him and help him to see that. And I can look at my own life when I really came to grips with the things that I needed to work on in my life. I was much more open, really. And it was almost like a switch. I became much more open to helping other people with their problems and the things that were in their lives than I had been before. Paul goes on to say, because he realizes that God's power is the strongest through our weaknesses. And he goes on to say, there was a list in our questions about 5 things that he delights in, and they're all hardships and struggles, things that he would have to wrestle with. There's a lot of things in our lives that, if you're like me, problem comes up, we try and deal with it ourselves. First thing we do is try and deal with the problem ourselves. It's another thing that, as I've grown older, is I've changed. My dad raised me to be confident in everything that I did. I mean, we did a lot of things in the outdoor, and he said, I want you to be confident in every situation that you come into. His idea was emergencies and surviving and stuff like that. But so in American society, and I'm a highly competitive person. Colt lost his basketball game yesterday. My grandson lost his basketball game yesterday, and I was talking to Phil Morris, who is a friend of mine at Creve Hall, is an elder at Creve Hall, and I said, Phil, I just hate to lose. I just hate to lose. I have that kind of a competitive nature. So when something happens, my first thing is I'm going to go fix it myself. But you reach things in life that you cannot fix yourself. Things crop up that you just can't do. I couldn't put a new heart valve in my heart. You know, which that really didn't shake me up, but you know what shook me up is it's going to be hard to go through this, but when Colt was a little kid, he contracted this disease called Kawasaki. I don't know whether you know what it is, but fever went up to like 102 or 3, and he was in the hospital for like 2 weeks. And but he wasn't that little. He was like 3, something like that. And one shot knocked it out. Once the shot was so expensive that the hospital had to wait 2 weeks to try everything else before they could justify, okay, we'll give him the shot. You know, and then they gave him the shot, and in like 2 days, he was bouncing off the walls. He was well, you know. But when he had Kawasaki's disease, there's nothing his grandfather could do for him. When he falls down, gets a scrape or something, he'll come running to Granddad and pick him up, and everything will be fine, you know. When we came down with Kawasaki's, there was nothing I could do, you know. And the Lord is the only person, the only hope that we have. And we cannot solve everything ourselves. We can't conquer sin by ourselves. We can't get to heaven by ourselves. You know, we can't move to the fifth chair by ourselves. We can probably move back to the third chair by ourselves, and you know, I just look at how much time was wasted in life by thinking I could do everything myself. Sandra mentions we talk about prayer. I pray for little things all the time.
We pray for parking spaces.
Pray for parking places. I don't care whether I get it or not, but it sure would be nice, you know. And there's just so much power in God's grace and what God has available for us in everything, that when we have an attitude in life that we are so conceited or so arrogant or so confident that we try and go through life solving everything ourselves before we even ask for any help. Most of the time when I asked God for help, it was after I'd tried everything I knew to do and it didn't work. Okay, now I'll call on the Lord. And it's so much easier to call on the Lord before you go into those things, before you walk into that. Todd Elliott, you know, man, we're almost out of time. Todd Elliott, many of you remember Todd, great guy. Maybe he's drifting off a little into outer space now, I don't know. But Todd Elliott kept his neighbor's dog. Neighbor went away, and Todd kept his neighbor's dog. And while his neighbor was gone, the dog ran away. And they were all over the neighborhood and all over his 15 acres and everywhere looking for this, stupid little dog. But I went up to Todd and I said, "Have you prayed about finding this dog yet?" No. You know? Well, you know, the dog came back in just a couple of days after that. I'm not going to say anything. But why are we, you know, we talk about a major self-righteous attitude here in Paul that the thorn was sent for, but all of us struggle with, we try and do everything ourselves before we even bring the Lord into the conversation. And we need to. Paul goes on here in the next 30 seconds, you know, Paul goes on here to talk about his concern for the Corinthians, and he tells them that he was never a burden to them, that all of the works and wonders and everything that all these apostles are supposed to do, we did in your presence all the time, diligently while we were with you and everything. And he comes down through there. It's an interesting verse in there. All children should have saved up for their parents, but children, after all, children should not save up for their parents, but their parents for their children. We all want to take care of our children and everything. Paul wanted to take care of the church, so he didn't want to be a burden to them. He didn't want to come to them after their possessions for him being there. He wanted to come for their hearts and for their souls. He says, many of you think that what we're saying, we're trying to defend ourselves. But that's not true. We're speaking in front of God, and everything that we say is to strengthen this church, is to strengthen you. And you talk about conceit and self-righteousness and everything, and Paul just flips the whole thing over here and says, everything that we do is not for ourselves and our own gain. Everything we do is to build up and to edify the church. And that's really where we all need to be. And I'm 2 minutes over, and I didn't hear a bell, so the bell person must not be diligent. But let's have a closing prayer, and we'll go on. Father, thank you for bringing us together here today. Thank you for giving us the time this morning, and thank you for being with Jeremy as he brought us a lesson. We're so thankful, Father, for young men that we see coming up behind us in the church that